Hey, Andy, I got a question for you. If an NBA early entry deadline falls in the forest and nobody's around to see it, did it actually happen?
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey there, what's up? Happy Monday. Welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, the only daily national college hoop show out there. We're your hosts. This is the man, Andy Patton. I'm Isaac Shade. You're joining us at the place to get your college basketball content every single day. It's all part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Thank you so much for making us your first listen or watch of the day. And I want to remind you, you can catch every episode ad-free on Amazon Music. Special shout out to all the everydayers joining us and all the great members of the Locked On College Basketball Discord. It's great to be together. Today's episode is brought to you by Amazon Fire TV Stick 4K. Turn any TV into your Xbox, no console needed. Head on over to amazon.com/Fire TV Locked On to learn more. Coming up on the show today, Andy, we joked about it in the cold open there, but the deadline to enter the NBA draft early passed over the weekend. I think some people were aware of it, maybe not others. We'll discuss which teams were the big winners there with players returning to school and which teams have a lot riding on the decisions of those who are testing the waters that may or may not come back to school. We'll update you on dates for those deadlines and all that. And Andy, some potentially ground shifting news out of Lexington, Kentucky over the weekend. The Wildcats are considering turning their athletic department into an LLC. Wow, Andy, that's crazy stuff. But the big news, I said it, Saturday night at 11:59 p.m. Eastern time, the early entry deadline came and went. And Andy, the big news is that earlier in the week when the transfer portal deadline came and went, that was a big thing that everybody was talking about. And the early entry deadline used to be that, Andy. It no longer is. Is this weird or is this our new normal? What do you think about it?
You know, it's funny, even just as you were talking right then, and as I was kind of thinking about this weekend and the storylines and everything, I wonder how much of it was just lining up with the NFL draft. I just wonder if this would have been a bigger storyline if every single person on ESPN wasn't losing their minds about Shooter Saunders falling to day 3 of the NFL draft. Because that's all anybody talked about this weekend in college sports. And I mean, I think justifiably it was a pretty unique story. But I do wonder how much. I think it's a bit of a chicken and the egg thing. Was this overshadowed because it's no longer as particularly relevant part of college basketball because of the transfer portal? Do we just assume that it's overshadowed and then we just don't talk about it as much and then it becomes kind of over? You know what I mean? It could kind of go different ways there. I think ultimately a big part of it is that there didn't feel like there was as many 50-50 is he going to declare for the draft players. And then obviously the fact that you can declare for the draft and then you still have about a month to choose whether you're going to actually stay in the draft or not. So it's not this the specific date doesn't come with this it doesn't matter as much. Obviously if you choose not to put your name into the NBA draft process, then that's huge news for your teams. And we're going to talk about some of those teams that got back players that are now no longer going to consider the NBA draft for this cycle. And that's huge for those teams. But so many teams might still end up being huge winners and might get really good players on their roster. We're just maybe not going to know for an entire month until that withdrawal deadline, which is on May 28th. At 11:59 Eastern time. That's the deadline that I think will carry a little bit more weight in the college basketball space of if players are staying, there's going to be some players who stay in the draft process that we're surprised by. Guys we're expecting to come back to school who we think are going to make a big impact in college basketball next year who decide to stay in the draft. And then there's going to be kind of the flip side of guys who do the opposite, who return to school. Some of them who might be in the transfer portal right now who suddenly on May 29th are saying I'm not in the NBA draft process anymore. I want to go play college ball again. And then all of a sudden there's going to be this big jump of we need to land that guy, just like there was with Coleman Hawkins last year of everybody wanted to get Coleman Hawkins and everybody wanted to get Tremont Mark and Jameer Watkins and other guys who pulled their name out of the draft at the last minute. So it just feels like this date in particular is kind of just the least interesting out of the other dates that carry more weight with the transfer portal deadline and the withdrawal deadline. So I think that combined with the NFL draft kind of made this date just kind of pass without a lot of fanfare.
Yeah, Andy, I think there's something to that because everyone is so locked in now on the transfer portal, and are my guys staying at my school as opposed to going to another school versus going to the NBA draft? And I think part of it too is that the combo of NIL and the transfer portal has kept a lot of those fringe guys. Like prior to this, there were so many second rounders that were like, screw it, I'll stay in the draft, maybe go make some money in the G League or overseas, that those guys are the ones staying in school now, but they might transfer. And that's where I think more fans are probably concerned with. And I think that's a massive part of it too. The other thing that we should say to make sure of, Andy, you so correctly said May 28th as the deadline. Folks, do not get confused. You're going to see two dates out there. There's an NBA withdrawal deadline, which is June 15th, 10 days before the draft. Don't pay attention to that one for college returners. The one you got to see is May 28th, which is 10 days after the combine ends. If people tell you, you tell them they're wrong when they say June 15th, because that doesn't matter for college. So, Andy, you said it, and here's where we need to go now. We do know some teams that got back key pieces that definitively have already said, like, yes, I could go to the NBA draft, but I'm going to stay in school. That's specifically who we're looking at. Not guys like a Braden Smith at Purdue, who doesn't really have anywhere to go other than transferring, right? But guys who like legitimately could have gone into the draft and been drafted, but have already said, I'm staying in. Andy, let's give our top 4 players of that type.
Well, first of all, we might have to start apologizing to Braden Smith and the lawyer family at the end of the show.
Can we just say Purdue's whole backcourt now?
We're going to apologize to the whole backcourt. No, I think the first one I want to talk about here, Isaac, is a name that I think kind of encapsulates perfectly what you were talking about with that second round pick. Like normally I'd go in the NBA and like, test out that. And if I don't get there and if I don't get drafted, I'll get a 2-way contract, or I'll just go in the G League, or I'll go overseas. But now those guys are coming back and playing college basketball because they can make real money. And so that's JT Toppin coming back to Texas Tech. I think the first really notable name that we saw in this cycle who said, I am not going into the NBA draft process, I am staying in school. And Toppin was a guy who got draft buzz after his freshman year at New Mexico, and he did kind of the other part of this conversation, which was instead of going into the draft as a fairly raw freshman who had only played against Mountain West competition and hadn't really, I think he might have gotten drafted after his freshman year, but I don't know how high he would have gotten selected. So he opted to return to school, but enter the transfer portal, goes to Texas Tech, makes a lot of money, boosts his draft stock, and then decides to return to school again, as opposed to, he would have been a second round pick this year. I can almost guarantee it. Maybe good enough workouts, he sneaks in the first round conversation, but not so good workouts. And all of a sudden he's kind of in the late second conversation. And now he comes back to school, reportedly getting a big old bag of money from the Red Raiders. And it's like, I don't really blame him for that. I totally, I'm glad. I think anybody who roots for this sport and wants to see talented players play in college basketball should be thrilled that JT Toppin could have been in the NBA a year ago and is now not only came back for one more year at the high major level, he's going to be back for another one. Everybody should be thrilled, with the exception of high-profile teams in the Big 12 who are probably not thrilled to see JT Toppin back in the mix for Grant McCaslin's team.
I just wish his bag was a little bit smaller so that Darion Williams would come out. Like, I think because of all the money they've have committed to him, it's like Darion's like, well, you can't pay me, I'm out. Andy, the second player on our list that we're like, this team, congrats on getting him back, is Magoon Gwath, one of my favorite names in college basketball, staying at San Diego State. And he had kind of entered the portal and probably had some NBA draft buzz as well. But he's a legit 7-footer who can do a lot of stuff. Missed a couple games down the stretch, but came back for San Diego State in their play-in game in Ohio against North Carolina, in Dayton there against North Carolina. Had a really good game, just reminded everybody of all the great stuff he can do on both ends of the floor, Andy, right? Like, he can get out and run, he can block shot. I mean, I think he could be at least in the mix for Mountain West Player of the Year next year. I mean, he's a phenomenal basketball player. Got 3 years of eligibility left, Andy. I really congrats to the Aztecs for getting him back.
Yeah, and he's similar to Toppin, and obviously from the same conference, similar position, and for him to have not only forewent going to the NBA draft, but to stay at San Diego State as opposed to transferring elsewhere, where he would have gotten attention. He was getting attention from the very best programs in college basketball, and he's coming back to the Aztecs. That's so huge for them. And a couple other ones here quickly, Isaac, that we want to talk about. Thomas Houck returning for the Gators, the national champions, Florida Gators, getting Houck back. There's reports that both Alex Condon and Ruben Chinyelu are in the draft process, but have maintained their eligibility. So they could, in theory, return to Todd Golden's team as well. There were some articles that Alex Condon was saying, like, oh, we'll see what these guys do. We'll see what Thomas does. Maybe if he comes back, I'll come back. And I don't know that you want to take those comments super seriously, but it probably doesn't hurt to know that the roster that they're building is, I mean, obviously they get Xavion Lee coming in, and this is going to be a really good team for the Gators. And whether Condon or Chinyelu come back remains to be seen, obviously, but getting Houck back is huge for Todd Golden's team. And then we got to mention Richie Saunders. Richie Saunders coming back for BYU, a team that already loaded up with AJ Dybansa coming in, the number one freshman in the country, with Rob Wright getting that big $3 million paycheck from Baylor to come over to BYU as their starting point guard. Now with Richie Saunders back in the mix, this team's got a lot of depth, a lot of talent, a lot of experience. The BYU fans should be very excited, and having Saunders back is a huge boost for them.
4 quick honorable mentions, Andy. Those were our 4 main, but Houston getting back JoJo Tugler, who, is probably a late second round draft pick if we're talking about it for real, but is the reigning Big 12 Defensive Player of the Year. It's massive to get him back, especially with a Houston guard in the mix for the portal. I don't want to mention his name because we're going to talk about him in the next segment. Duke getting back Isaiah Evans, and I know people might scratch their head at that one. Legit has draft buzz, even though he didn't play a ton, didn't play much, if at all, in that Houston loss, Andy, but he's back at Duke. I think will be their starting 2 as things stand right now. Great stuff there. And then Oregon, speaking of an Evans, gets back KJ Evans and Jackson Shellstad, and I think that's really good for Coach Altman and what they're looking at. And they got a big guy also in the draft mix, but we're going to save him for next segment as well. But Andy, just some big names back at schools, giving them good signs for next season.
Well, speaking of bigs in the Big Ten, Dusty May and Michigan, they have a roster right now that looks more than capable of competing at the very top of the Big Ten once again after a stellar first season for him with the Wolverines. But that's only if they keep the guys that they have on the roster. 2 big names in the NBA draft process. We're going to talk about that and some other teams that are waiting on some of those players coming up here in just a second. But first, folks, the NBA playoffs are here, and FanDuel is giving new customers an incredible way to get in on the action. Right now, when you join FanDuel and place your first $5 bet, you'll get $250 in bonus bets if your bet wins. I love how FanDuel makes betting super easy, whether it's picking my favorite team or diving into player props. From three-pointers to steals to assists, FanDuel has so many ways to bet your favorite player props. Plus, after the game tips off, you can even combine live prop bets into a same-game parlay for a chance to win big. Tonight, we got Cleveland at Miami, Cavs 8.5-point favorites trying to get the sweep over the Heat. And then we got Rockets at Warriors 3.5-point favorites looking to take a commanding 3-1 lead in that series. If you like that, any other odds, they got some national championship odds for college basketball out there as well. Do not miss out. Head to FanDuel.com and claim your $250 in bonus bets today. All right, Isaac, we talked about some of the teams that got some great news with players not putting their name in the NBA draft process and returning to school and what that means for those programs and why we're seeing that happen a little bit more often with second-round picks in the NIL era where they can make some big money coming back to school. But there still are, without very many, there's not really a lot of punishments for putting your name in the NBA draft process and then just returning to school later. So we are seeing a lot of players who are doing that. We're going to talk about some players who have put their name in the transfer portal and put their name in the NBA draft process, just giving themselves the maximum amount of options that you can possibly have, which I don't blame you for doing that. That makes a ton of sense. But it's leaving a handful of teams kind of in a bit of a holding pattern while they try to figure out, is 2/5 of my starting lineup going to be here or not? And what does that look like for these teams? So I want to start the conversation talking about the Michigan Wolverines, who 2 of their front court players in the draft process right now. Danny Wolf, who was just so tremendous last year for the Wolverines, coming over from Yale. Big man who can do so versatile with what he can do with the basketball and his passing skills and everything. And then Yaxel Lendeberg, transfer from UAB, who had a ridiculously great season for the Blazers, was a guy who is still getting serious buzz as a potential first-round guy, even coming out of a mid-major program, which doesn't happen all that often. But he has committed to Michigan in the transfer portal. So for him, it's either return to school, go to Michigan and see if you can boost your draft stock like Danny Wolf did, or it's stay in the draft process. So for Michigan, you're kind of sitting here waiting to see what's going to happen with these 2 guys, Isaac. It's a tough spot to be for Dusty May's club.
Yeah, roster construction is insaner than ever, Andy. If I can make insaner a word here, because
sure
it's
can.
like if you're these players, I totally get why you would both enter the draft and the portal, because a team's going to have to backfill, right? They can't
Yeah.
sit around and wait, and you can't blame them, and you can't blame the player for trying. So I loved it a couple years ago, for example, when Oscar Shibwe said to Coach Cal, like, you go find somebody and fill my spot. We thought they were going to get Hunter Dickinson. He ends up,
Right.
it's like that, Andy, right? And so, look, all signs point to Danny Wolf is done and gone, not coming back, right? Like, he is, when guys will say, like, I'm 100% focused on the draft, but that just means, like, I could come back to school, but all my focus is getting ready for that. Like, no. I mean, basically, it's like you don't really forgo your eligibility anymore, because it's like you can hire an agent now, so that whole conversation is different. But I 10% or less chance that Danny Wolf is back, in my humble opinion. Lindeborg, though, I wouldn't be surprised if he's in Ann Arbor next year. I think that will happen, but I don't think we'll have the Twin Tower situation again.
Yeah, I'm with you on that too. And I think that they're probably the most interesting team if you think Wolf is more of a 50-50, but if you're pretty confident that he's leaving, which I think the general consensus is it's pretty unlikely that he's coming back, then Michigan still has a lot riding on whether Lindeberg is going to come to campus or not. But it's not as significant if they're not waiting on both those guys, and if they're expecting that Wolf will be gone. Another team that's on this list here is the previous back-to-back national champion UConn Huskies. I almost said defending champion, not anymore for poor Danny Hurley's team. But Alex Caravan, who has won 2 of those championships as we are recording this right now. And I think that is a very important thing to note. Alex Caravan has not announced, there has not been any announcement by the school, by him, by anybody about whether he put his name in the NBA draft process or not. By the time you are listening to this, it is possible that has changed and there's come out that he did put his name in the draft, or that he chose to run it back at UConn and is not declaring for the draft at this point. So we wait to figure that out with Alex Caravan. Obviously, UConn would love to have him back for a 4th year, a veteran guy. He didn't take the leap that a lot of people hoped or thought that he would take, but is still a very quality player and somebody that I'm sure Danny Hurley would love to have back. Silas Demery Jr. as well in the draft process, who transferred from Georgia to UConn. I don't think there's a ton of buzz about Demery not returning to school or not going to UConn, but certainly would be a tough loss for UConn if he did decide to stay in the draft process after being kind of one of their big prized additions in the transfer portal alongside Dayton's Malachi Smith.
Yeah, Andy, absolutely. I mean, it's weird with Caravan, man. Like, why don't we know something?
Yeah.
Like, it's almost, I don't know. It's weird. Anyway, hopefully we learn more on Monday. Andy, we move to a team that did make the Final Four this year, and that was the number 1 overall seed in the NCAA tournament, Auburn Tigers, who were waiting on stud freshman Tahad Pettiford. Andy, we saw him time and time again this year have magnificent games in big game situations. Unfortunately, wasn't able to do that against Florida, as part of the reason Auburn couldn't hold that lead in the Final Four. Really hope Bruce Pearl can get Pettiford back. I'd love to see a sophomore year out of him, but it's all going to depend on what he learns and what execs tell him. So, Andy, that's big time. But we got another Final Four guard that is waiting, making his team wait for an answer as well.
Yeah, Milos Uzon still in the draft process, I should say, from the Houston Cougars. Be interested to see what he ends up doing. Obviously, Houston has a tremendous incoming class with Kingston Flemings and Isaiah Harwell, both 5-star guards who are going to step into big roles right away for Coach Kelvin Sampson. They also landed Pop Isaacs in the transfer portal. I don't think any of those moves were based around what they're expecting Uzon to do necessarily, nor do I think that it's going to feel like it's pushing him out or anything. But I'm always curious, like when you see a team that already has kind of backfilled some of those spots, again, they'll make room. They'll happily make room for Milos Uzon, but it is kind of interesting. Like, again, like you said, roster construction is just so challenging right now. And leads into the next team here, which is Kentucky, a team that lost most of last year's roster, in part because most of them were already on their final year of eligibility. Guys like Lamont Butler and Jackson Robinson and Amari Williams, like there was no chance that those guys were coming back for Kentucky. But one player who could come back is Otega Owe. And for Kentucky right now, like they've the latest from, we talked to Locked On Kentucky host Lance Daw, was that they're done building their roster. Like, they're planning to be set right now. And I think Travis Perry entering the portal might have changed that a little bit for them, but
Sure.
like, it's based on kind of waiting to figure out what's happening with Owe, because if he's coming back, you're good, you're set, you feel confident with what you got. If he's not coming back, you may want to still, be able to find another player to add in the portal. Worth pointing out that Cam Williams, the Tulane transfer, and Jalen Lowe, the Pitt transfer, are both also in the draft process, although I don't think there's a lot of expectation that either of them will play anywhere other than Lexington next year.
Yeah, Andy, that's good. Hey, let me fly through a list of other guys we got on this list, and I want you to tell me the one player who you think is most likely to stay in the draft out of this. You ready?
Yes.
Carter Knox from Arkansas had a really good kind of close to the season. Oregon's Nate Biddle, the big man, we mentioned him earlier. I feel like he's the best bald spot in college basketball since Brian Cardinal. Florida, both Alex Condon and Ruben Chinyelu, who you mentioned earlier. Wisconsin's John Blackwell, who really came on this year. Drake Powell, the freshman from UNC, a little bit of a do-it-all guy. Georgetown's Thomas Sorber. Josh Hubbard, a little diminutive guard who's phenomenal from Mississippi State. And then, Andy, a couple wild cards who are in the transfer portal and the draft. RJ Lewis, who probably doesn't want to go play for Rick Pitino ever again. PJ Haggerty from Memphis and his $4 million bag he's looking for. And Texas Tech's Darion Williams, who we mentioned earlier, probably can't go back to Lubbock because of somebody else's $4 million bag. Andy, out of those guys, who do you think are one or two of the most likely to stay in?
Yeah, Drake Powell, to me. Drake Powell, and I'm not sure that he should be the most likely to stay in the draft process, but it sounds like from all accounts he is pretty likely going to stay in that process. I think he could do great things if he were to return to North Carolina. I think he could do great things even if he wanted to go somewhere else in college basketball, if he'd given himself that opportunity to do so. But he seems really locked in on the NBA draft process, and I think that it's not that he's bad or anything like that. I think he could benefit from another year in college basketball, but also NBA scouts are going to see a dude who's 6'6", who's got just raw athleticism, who, like you said, can do a little bit of everything, was a good 3-point shooter last year. Somebody's going to take a chance on him. Somebody's going to take a chance on him at a level high enough in the draft process that I think I don't know how many guarantees he'll get, but I think he'll feel confident enough, barring a catastrophic performance at the combine or in interviews or anything like that. I think Drake Powell is going to feel good enough that he's going to stay in the draft process, feeling like he's going to end up somewhere in the first round or at least early second round. So he's the one that I'm most confident stays in the draft process. Outside of that, I think Alex Condon's probably gone. I'd be pretty surprised if he came back to Florida. So I think those are probably the two. Sorber's a really interesting one to me. I think he should probably go unless Georgetown's got a bunch of money for him. But he's one that I think a lot of kind of amateur draft analysts love, Thomas Sorber, but I'm not sure how the real scouts feel about him yet. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with him.
Gonna be a lot of fun to track all the draft stuff as we lead up to the draft coming. Andy, I think it's going to be a college top-heavy draft this year, which is great because we've not seen a ton of that lately. It's good for us. Andy, we just talked about the Kentucky Wildcats, and they are trying their best to enter us into a brand new era, aiming to be ahead of the curve by turning their athletic department into an LLC. Is this the wave of the future? We're going to have that conversation in just a second. Right after I tell you about Game Time. Y'all, there is nothing like the atmosphere of an NBA playoff game. Every bucket, every defensive stop, every moment, it feels huge, just like a dunk. Right as the buzzer. Was Aaron Gordon's finger still on there? I don't know, maybe. It's electric in the arena, and with Game Time, you can be part of it without the stress of last-minute ticket hunting. Game Time makes it fast and easy to get playoff tickets, even when demand is sky high. Prices on the app actually go down the closer to tip-off you get. And last-minute deals from Game Time can save you up to 60% off. I love doing that, but not even just for sports, for concerts, comedy, theater, and more. And also, you can toggle on the all-in pricing so that you don't have to get any surprise fees at checkout. You know exactly what you're going to pay when you're looking at ticket prices. Andy just mentioned the two playoff games that are happening tonight. Rockets at Warriors. The cheapest I found is $191 for this thing for Game 4. But if you want to go see the Cavs close out the Miami Heat down in South Beach, you can get in the door for $21 for that thing on Game Time, man. I'd grab tickets for that in a heartbeat. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the app, create an account, and use code Locked On College for $20 off your first purchase. Again, create an account and redeem code Locked On College for $20 off. Terms apply. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. All right, Andy, we're going to be really brief on this, which is fine because it's just the beginning of the conversation anyway. But on Friday, University of Kentucky's Board of Trustees approved a proposal to shift their model of their athletic department into becoming an LLC, which will be called Champions Blue. Andy, to the best of our knowledge, this is the first of its kind among D1 schools. Let me just read a quote direct from the university's Twitter account, and then I'll toss it to you. Quote, "This move will provide the department with the flexibility to unlock new revenue streams," interesting, "through public/private partnerships and potentially other transactions such as real estate," end quote. Andy, this feels like a brand new world for collegiate athletics as we just keep taking steps toward the professionalization of what we're doing. And so anytime we see something like this, and I know you maybe have some more context to add to it all, but similar to adding GMs to coaching staffs, we have to ask the question, is what Kentucky has done here the first step towards a brand new normal in collegiate athletics?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely it is. And I think like we're at the point now where the train is not stopping. Like the direction that things are moving in this sport, especially without any guardrails right now, which will change. Obviously, the House settlement is a huge part of that in terms of enacting at least some level of rules and autonomy and just more than we have now, which is literally nothing. I mean, they keep saying the wild, wild west, but it really feels like that with players getting poached off of rosters and being offered millions of dollars. And like, it's just, I mean, there's no real regulations right now. And so for programs to be deciding like, what do we want to do to protect our student athletes, but also to have consistent revenue stream and to be able to continue to be for Kentucky in their case, to be able to still afford to buy the best players that you can and put together the best roster that you can and compete for national championships. And that's what they want to do. And they're feeling like this is the direction that they want to go. And it's hard for me to imagine that others will not follow suit or will follow suit. They will. You're going to see it in the other schools in the SEC. You're going to see it kind of get into the Big Ten. And where I'm very curious is where does it stop? Because I was just talking to a buddy of mine on Saturday, and we were talking about this, and he and I both worked together at the University of Portland. It was like, can they do this? Like, is this something that they have the ability to do? And like, UP is not, Stony Brook, or it's not some other, school that just moved up to the D1 level in like a St. Thomas or whatever. Like UP is in a good competitive basketball conference in the WCC. They've been at the D1 level for decades. And like, they probably don't have the ability to do this kind of thing. And so what does that mean? Like, what does that mean for, the future of college basketball? Because already right now, schools like that are not, they're not, anybody that Kentucky wants is not going to Portland. Like, it's just not happening. So it's not like it's a dramatic difference in that specific case. But if you do start seeing these programs racking up, these LLCs and finding different ways to bring revenue streams in to pay their players, and other programs just don't have the ability to do that, at that point, you're basically playing a different sport. And I think that's where I'm curious what changes will happen there, because I don't think this is stopping. I don't think it's even really slowing down. So what happens to bring it back to a level playing field? I think the only real option is some kind of split. And I don't know exactly what that looks like or when it happens, but it's kind of hard to imagine that they're just going in completely different directions right now. Like the smaller schools have taken very tiny steps forward, whereas these schools like Kentucky are taking huge steps, and the gap is widening.
And it'll be interesting to see. Obviously, this is a college basketball podcast, so that's what we're focused on.
Sure.
But because of even the differing levels of teams in each D1 thing, right? Like we've got 360 plus teams in D1 college basketball, and in football, you've got fewer. And some schools don't play the non-rev sports, and some do. So there's like all of that. And I've wondered for a long time. I had my cousin was a missionary in Spain, and he told me that all of their teams like associated with the universities there are all like club teams that are not official university. Like there's all of these types of things are on the table that we got to look at. I'm surprised that it was an SEC team to do this first. I assumed it would have been ACC, Big 12, or something like that, right? That didn't have the massive media deals that the SEC and Big 10 have right now. So that's even shocking to me as well that it was an SEC school, Andy.
One more thing I'll add on here because we're talking a little bit about the House settlement and things of that nature. I'm so and it's at this point, it's specifically kind of Gonzaga related, but it is intriguing how it'll impact other programs like them, where Gonzaga is about to join a conference that is a football conference, and they are a non-football school. They're getting the same, allegedly they're going to get the same media deal that the other teams in that conference do. We haven't seen that yet, but like, at what point does the disparity kind of, I'm just curious what will happen when a school like Gonzaga is spending way more money on basketball than every other team in the conference. And obviously like Kentucky and like Georgia and Alabama and those schools are going to spend a crap load of money on football. They're also going to spend a lot of money on basketball. Don't get me wrong, but like Kentucky's probably going to allocate more money to basketball. And at some point, I don't think you can police that necessarily outside of having some minimums and maximums, but it's just going to be weird. Like, I don't know. I'm just curious how something like that is going to shake out and how LLCs could be a part of that conversation as well. It's just a lot of strange nuance that nobody really knows what's going to look like yet.
Andy, it's going to be a whirlwind, but folks, we are here for you. We're going to walk every step of the way through it. We will learn what we can learn and pass it along to you to help navigate through this wild countryside of collegiate athletics, whatever I mean by that.
Folks, on that countryside note, that's going to wrap it up for us today here on the Locked On College Basketball Podcast. Again, we'll be back with you all later this week, continuing to talk about the transfer portal, continuing to talk any updates we get on the house settlement or this LLC situation, and eventually Alex Caravan's NPA draft decision, as we don't have that yet, but I'm sure we'll get to that at some point this week as well. But again, that's going to wrap it up for us today. So as always, we want to say apologies to the Purdue backcourt / lawyer family. Let's go Wild Popes now with their Wild Popes LLC. Cheers to the McBruins. And until Tuesday, peace out.